Welcome back to another UNC basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you are watching us on our rapidly growing YouTube channel, that is called Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones, and joining me is our director of basketball recruiting and analyst, longtime AAU college and high school coach, Mr. David Sisk, who is doing the tough stuff today because David broke his ribs a couple weeks ago. So he's toughing it out. And we've had people on our staff with COVID. You did a podcast last year with me when you had COVID. So you're a tough guy. Everyone else is pretty tough too. And there's little old me just kind of moving along through, buddy.
We are tough. We could write a story on being tough. It takes a lot to sit here in this recliner, with two broken ribs, man. I'm willing to fight the battle.
It's right. My knee hurts. I don't know if I can type.
I'm like Ronnie Lott. Go ahead and cut my pinky off, man.
My toughness is that I get my 10,000 steps every day. So I've had 242 straight days. And sometimes when I'm traveling, like that Notre Dame thing, and it was below zero. So I'm walking the hallways in the hotel and they're looking at me like I have horns growing out of my head, but I got my steps in. So
that's like me. I feel the circle up on this watch. 28 days out of 30 every month. But since I've done this, that's been, yesterday I did it a little bit over 2 weeks ago. And yesterday I walked 7 miles. So I kind of got on a treadmill.
Nice.
I walked 2 days, but they tell me not to do it, but I've just laid around so long. I don't think it's going to hurt.
Oh man, that would drive me crazy not being able to get out and move. So, well, we're going to talk Carolina basketball here. The Tar Heels had 3 games in the last week, basically 3 games since we last did a pod right before Christmas. They had a postponement during that time period in between. So we're going to focus on the win at Boston College, the loss at Notre Dame, and on Saturday, a really impressive win at home over Virginia, ending a 7-game losing streak to the Cavaliers. And I don't know, we really want to go with this. I really don't want to go game by game. People have already kind of done that. I want to sort of bring something more out in this discussion, David, because you and I haven't talked about it at all. We haven't even talked in about 10 or 12 days. Maybe we talked for a couple of minutes about a week ago about something else, but I'm really curious to get your thoughts on Armando Bacot, because before you go off on that, I believe 11 out of 15 games he's had a double-double. I think it's 6 straight games or 7 straight games with a double-double. And in this 3-game stretch that we're going to talk about, he's averaged 22.7 points, 16.3 rebounds, shot 67.8% from the floor. And another sign of his improvement, another sign of his concentration being at a big-time level, is the fact that he was 13 for 16 from the free throw line, 81.3%. He's hitting his free throws this year. He's just doing a lot of things well. So, David, kind of take it from there. Not just the last 3 games, but overall, what do you think about where Armando Bacot has his game right now?
I just think he's tremendous. In watching him, he's consistent. I remember when I first started working for you, which would have been in August 2020. And we were talking, I didn't watch as much of the team then as I do now. And you were talking about, that would have been off his freshman year. His inconsistency just kind of drove everybody crazy. And you can see the leaps and bounds that he's made since then. Consistent, just strong, very skilled, incredible footwork, has all the moves, has all the counters. Things I'm starting to see now is not only can he face up and knock the mid-range jumper or the deep 2 down, he goes by people. If they close out hard, he's really good at going a straight line to the left and right hand, and it could even spin off of it. Just a bulk rebounder. And yeah, he's just tremendous. And I really get a kick out of listening to the people that I talk to that have no involvement with University of North Carolina or North Carolina basketball, that watch him and hear them talk about him just as people who appreciate basketball. And I'm telling you, he the same things that we're saying about him now that we come to praise Caesar, they're saying it all over the country about Armando Bacot. He's really, really a special talent.
Couple of things about his game I want to kind of go over with you because you've been coaching it, teaching this for a long time. As a guy who's covered him, and I've been just about every one of the games he's played, COVID last year, a couple I wasn't able to cover in person. But the thing that when I watch him, other than his obvious maturity and his growth in that area, and other than the way he carries himself in the court and something that happens bad on one end, he doesn't carry it to the other end anymore. All those things he's gotten a lot better at. But the one thing that I think that he's doing at an extremely high level for a college player is getting position down low. He gets position in good spots where if he gets the ball, he knows exactly what to do with it when he gets it, whether it's a drop step or a spin, whether he could turn it square and pump fake. He's gone up and under a couple of times on guys. He's able to get around a lot of defenders now. But his ability to get low, use his big, strong derriere, and to seal defenders is at a very, very high level. Hansbrough did stuff like that. Tyler Zeller was kind of good at it, but he was longer than Armando, so he used his length a lot. Armando is all about getting that position, sealing, and using guys when he gets on his hips in order to get a little separation and convert around the rim.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I give Hubert Davis credit too, because he puts him in good situations. I think Hubert Davis, obviously there's still question marks there. And I think he would tell you that too. There is for any coach in his first year. Yeah. But I think he's a good offensive coach. He has some good ideas. And he really gets Bacot in good situations where he's hard to double. And like you say, so he's put in good spots. And so, the player has to do something with it when he gets it. So like you say, he's able to root out room. And one thing I really like about him, he's so patient. He's never in a hurry. We could go back and we could talk about, you talked about Hansborough. You talked about, I would say maybe a Luka Garza from last year. Yeah. That put up similar numbers. But those guys were always playing like their hair was on fire. They were going a million miles an hour because they had such a motor. And he's just more of I shouldn't say relaxed, but he's a player who just takes his time. You can't speed him up. He's never in a hurry. He knows what he wants. It's almost like it's cat and mouse with it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to wait and see what you do. And then I'm either going to go ahead with my move or I'm going to counter. You can't speed him up. Al McGuire used to say catch, chin, and check. When you catch the ball, he does all that. He gets good position. He catches it. He looks over that inside shoulder to see where the defense at, chins it and then checks it and then makes his move. So very good fundamentally. And like we say, and that's the first thing they tell you about coaching low post player, really good low post players. They look at their hands or look at their feet, but they tell you cannot get in a hurry down there. You've got to have good fundamentals and you've got to make the appropriate reads. You
got to be able to feel the defender. And that's something that he used to turn into defenders a lot his first year. And he did it sometimes last year in part because there were usually last year, two bigs down there. So help side was a lot closer. I don't see him turning into trouble. I don't see him increasing the degree of difficulty on his shot based on his moves. He did that as a freshman a lot. He did that last year occasionally. The efficiency of his movement and his footwork and how he creates shots for himself right now is at a very, very high level.
Mm-hmm. It is. And, I go back to I can think of the bucket that he had against Notre Dame to put them up 67, 66. He caught the ball down on the left block, went middle that way where he could go with that jump hook. He got cut off and he spun back and finished with his left. And that's one thing too. He can go with either hand. I remember Garrison Brooks last year when he got the ball down there. You pretty well knew that no matter how the defense played him, a jump hook was coming over his left shoulder of his right hand. And he's got so much weaponry offensively. Like you said, all the moves, he can go with either hand. He's got the footwork. He's got counters and then counters to the counters. So defensively, you really don't know what he's going to do.
Well, one of the things too that he's doing more now is he's reposting. He's kicking it out and he's posting again right away. He's not relaxing. Before you might see him kick it out and he's like, okay, kind of upright a little bit, but he posts right back up and he gets the ball back often. And that's the other thing about this, David, is they're looking for him. And you ran in your film review of the Virginia game that we ran on Sunday. One of the clips that you put in there was just about how everybody, I don't know if everybody touched it on the perimeter, but at least 3 guys did. And the first thing they did, their nose went right into where Armando was. They were looking to see where he was. They're looking to feed him. That's their highest percentage of situation, getting the ball into him and letting him do his thing. And they were on it as a team on Saturday.
Yeah, but they've got to do that consistently.
Yeah.
I think he started, getting the feel for it. But you go back to Notre Dame, and I started the film review for 3 minutes. I think it was 3:44, something like that, left on the game. When he, like I said, he made that shot to put them up 167-66, and he never got another touch. And you had a bunch of possessions with no passes. You had a bunch of possessions with 1 passes. And with 1 pass, not passes. And I go back to yesterday. Things look good when Caleb Love's drilling 25-foot 3-pointers off the dribble and everything. And he can do it. And it's not to the point that he can do it. But there's 2 steps that this North Carolina team has to make. Number 1 is come out with intensity every game. That's been the big issue. And I think most fans will tell you that's the big issue of intensity-wise, knowing who this team is. But the other thing about them is, and they've not had it, the next closest game they've had outside of Notre Dame was Brown, a 7-point game. Those are the only games they've had under 10. So win or lose. So this was a North Carolina team that have not been in this situation. And you could tell in the final 4 minutes of that game, they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
They were hurried possessions. And I know we're not talking about Notre Dame right now, but I'm bringing it up.
Well, we're talking about the week. It's actually a good segue into what I want to talk about. Go ahead.
I'm talking about the contrast of what it was yesterday when they were looking for Armando Bacot. Because I have no doubt in my mind, if they would have been looking for Armando Bacot in the final 4 minutes of that game, they would have beaten Notre Dame. So, it can't be – it's got to be consistent. They've got to have the ball movement. They got to make good decisions and get the right people the right shots. So that's the next progression with this team.
And I think that's where the value of this week really lies. We're going to I'm a big believer in taking a segment and let's go back and revisit it, a month later, 2 months later, and see what the team learned from it. But to your point, both points that you just made, Caleb Love said that after Notre Dame. He said 2 things. Number 1, we didn't take them seriously enough because they lost to Boston College, of course, ignoring the fact that they had beaten Kentucky. The other thing was he said, we haven't really been in that situation. And he's the one who didn't handle it that well, probably more than anybody else, because he was on the ball a lot. He kind of reverted back to freshman Caleb. We have this saying, some of us on Press Row that travel and cover the team, there's sophomore Caleb and freshman Caleb. And that night, he was kind of going back and forth. Freshman Caleb, one possession, sophomore Caleb, the next possession. And he actually kind of made some tough decisions, some poor decisions late in that game. He's the one that needs to see Armando. And that's why yesterday on Saturday, we're recording this Sunday night, when he was talking about Armando and he was asked about Armando, he's like, yeah, we got to feed him, man. We got to feed him. So sometimes you have to have that happen to learn. It gets more entrenched because this is a process. It's a process for these guys. It's a process for Hubert. And it's a process for these guys under Hubert. But I think that Saturday against Virginia, the way UVA defends, the way UVA has caused so many problems for Carolina offensively, especially during that 7-game losing streak that Carolina had against the Wahoos, the fact that the Tar Heels were so unselfish, found so many open shots all over the floor, and they fed the beast. They had a hot guy. They kept going to him. I think the Brady Manek flip to Bacot for the dunk late was just kind of symbolized the mindset and where this club was as far as being unselfish and their cohesion. They could take the last 5 minutes at Notre Dame and then take Saturday and say, okay, that's what we don't want. This is what we do want. It should be a pretty easy teaching session for Hubert at this point, don't you think?
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you what they need more than anything. They need close games.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, and look, they should beat Georgia Tech at home. And I know we would probably say if North Carolina beats Georgia Tech by 1 next Saturday, people would probably say, well, gosh, what was wrong with that team? They didn't come out, they didn't play well. They should, but somewhere along the line, they're going to have some close games. That's the only way you learn. The girls basketball coach at our school, the big Notre Dame basketball fan, of course, they beat Georgia Tech yesterday. I think it was in overtime. They won by 2.
Mm-hmm.
So they won 6 out of 7. But I told him, I said, there's something to be said for a team that knows how to win close games.
Yep.
And, we beat Kentucky by 2. There's the tight game there, like you say. And even when it was close with Georgia Tech, I didn't watch the game, but I was following the score. I said, well, they'll find a way to pull it out.
By the way, they have a 1-point win at Pitt during this stretch too. Yeah. Notre Dame does.
So here's the thing. If you're going to win at a high level, you're going to have to win tight games because North Carolina is going to have plenty of them in the ACC. So you've got to find a way. And one of the most important ways to do that, like you say, is it comes down to decision-making. Getting good shots is what it's all about. You get good shots and you keep the other team from getting them in the final 4 minutes. And, you talked about Caleb Love. I think one thing with this team's identity, I think they've kind of taken on the identity at times of Caleb Love because when things are going good, man, there's nobody better than Caleb Love.
Yeah.
When things are going bad, he has – and I don't think it's a thing that he folds. I think he wants to take on every challenge. And sometimes the decision-making – and things can get really bad all of a sudden. And I think the team kind of has taken on that deal where it's either really, really good. Like I say, they've not had any single-digit games, only 2 out of 14 or 15 games, win or lose.
Yeah.
So it's either really, really good or really bad, and they need more of that consistency. So if you talk about Bacot, I wish this team could take on the personality of Bacot. If they take on a personality, take on the personality of Bacot, where it's a consistent grind mode every game.
I wrote a column after Notre Dame about that, and part of it I took from what Armando said after the game, where he even said, look, someone asked him about, he went 21-17, I think, that night. And someone asked him about, well, you guys didn't win, but boy, you had a good performance and you're putting together all these double doubles. He said, I'll go 0-0 if we get a win. And I believe that. Sometimes athletes will say things because it's just kind of the thing you need to say. And it's sort of a canned response. I don't think there's canned responses with Armando. I don't think that's ever been his style. I don't think it'll ever be his style. And he apologized to the fans. He apologized to the former players that used to play here. We've talked about this a little bit, and I know Jacob and I have talked about it in a couple of our pods as well, but I've watched this young man come in, and he was Cole Anthony's buddy when he came in. I think that there were some thoughts about maybe being a one-and-done type talent. Didn't work out his first year. It was about this time 2 years ago, he's telling us in the media that he had this terrible stretch from early December to early January where he even admitted that he had voices in his head that were messing up his confidence and that kind of thing. And, those voices are long gone. If anything, it's a very positive motivational tone now. And he's grown up so much, and he's saying the right things, and he's embracing being a part of this culture. And he wants to have that experience of the typical Carolina basketball experience that Hubert has told these kids he wants them to have. Armando's totally bought into that. And you can tell by some of the things he says. I think he needs to be a guy that a term that I heard a long time ago from Jerry Wainwright when he was at UNCW is that of being a fanny smacker. And I asked Hubert on Friday, do you have any fanny smackers on the team? And he was kind of having some fun with it. And he said, no, ultimately. Armando's that guy. He doesn't need to get in people's faces, but he could be a fanny smacker by setting the example, which I think he's doing right now, but also by speaking out a little bit more. And I thought it was interesting because I think Caleb is kind of attaching himself to Armando a little bit. And Caleb is trying to grow up in the manner that Armando did. And if you listen to what Caleb said after the Virginia game, I think you're seeing some of that. So maybe some of that leadership, that lead by example, that lead by what you say, how you carry yourself, how you prepare, that Armando is starting to show these guys. I think it's starting to trickle down a little bit. And that is huge because, as you know, being around this stuff for years at so many different levels, you've got to have a guy that's a pace setter. If you don't have that guy and they look to the coach, especially a first-year coach, it's not going to work. They're going to be wildly inconsistent. And this team, in order to break away from its inconsistency, they have to follow the pace leader. And I think Armando's that guy.
And I think Armando gets it as far, and you said it, playing into culture. And I was thinking about that even before you said this. There's a difference in playing at University of North Carolina, playing basketball at University of North Carolina, and playing at Clemson or Wake Forest or somewhere like that. And I no disrespect to any of those teams, but there's probably, if there's 300 and I don't know, 68 Division I teams, there's a difference of playing at North Carolina compared to anywhere than about 363 other programs, without just the blue bloods, and we'll throw UCLA in there. You've got, and I've said this before, I know it from being in the high school program that one had a lot of banners. I always said it, the banners that hang up there can kill you. I mean, they can just drive you to your grave almost with all the pressure that comes with it. But and I think that's why it hurt him. He understood what goes with it at playing at North Carolina. And sometimes you're not sure if all the players do at this time. But I would rather have the pressure than have a group who are players who start to look at those banners, they come in and they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
If a player come in now at UNLV or somewhere, and I even wonder if a guy plays football at Miami and he comes and you see if okay, that was 25, 30 years ago. Does that mean anything? Yeah. North Carolina is still very irrelevant, but with youngsters today, the future to them is what they're going to have for lunch, and history is what they had for breakfast. And it doesn't go any farther ahead, and it doesn't go any farther back. So that the pressure and the expectations have got to be relevant. And I think what Armando Bacot has done is he's kind of kept that alive. And he's trying to make sure, I think, that that's not lost. You can tell it hurt him at Notre Dame and some of these other performances. So I hope he's the leader, and I hope the rest of these guys listen and they follow.
I think they are. And that brings me back to Caleb Love again. It's funny because we really do talk sophomore Caleb, freshman Caleb, make those kind of comments, a couple of us on Press Row, and we don't do it disrespectfully. It's kind of more observational. And what I think is really neat about Wednesday's performance for Caleb, he didn't have a very good first half, and he struggled late in the last few minutes of the game, which he certainly acknowledged, but he still scored 15 points and was 6 for 12 from the field. And the general feeling was, boy, that was like Caleb a year ago. But that wasn't like Caleb a year ago. He's improved so much. Last year, he had 4 games that he shot 50% from the floor. And I think 2 of them, he was right at 50. So he was 6 for 12 on the road, scored 15 points, and people see it as a bad performance. I think that's a testament to how much he's improved, David. I think it shows you how dynamic he can be at times. I said back in October, we don't know if this team has any dynamic players, but there are times when Caleb kind of goes to a level where he is dynamic. On Sunday against Virginia, when he had that bucket, went down on the other end, got a steal. He had a 3, went down the other end, got a steal, and hit a pull-up jumper. And there's a guy that used to hit pull-up jumpers in Chapel Hill back in the 70s at ward number 12 that it kind of looked like that for a second. And somebody I know who's a big Carolina fan I talked to this morning actually said, boy, that looked like Phil, which is when you get that comparison from an old-time fan, it's kind of a good thing. But I think what it showed was the patience he had in pulling up and not trying to force something going to the rim, which he did all the time last year. I think we have seen a very, very different Caleb Love, and I think he's trending toward becoming a more consistent player because he is becoming a more mature player, and you can see that in his play. and also by what he tells us after games. Him admitting some of the things he did in South Bend, I think, was very, very important. And we saw the effect of that on Saturday.
But I've still got to see it consistently because, like you said, the game got away at Notre Dame because the guards and I've used this on here before as a friend of mine told me about the individual. He wants to be the groom at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral. And that's what Caleb and RJ Davis both were kind of like in the last 4 minutes. There was no ball movement. There were no post touches. There were no passes. It was just like, okay, I've got confidence. I believe I can score. I don't believe my man can guard me, and I'm going to go create a shot for myself, make it. And it backfired. So we've got to see the execution. I tell you what someone told me today. I was talking to someone, and she's was an outstanding college basketball player. She's watched the Notre Dame game in North Carolina. We were talking today, and she said, from watching that game, it just doesn't look to me like offensively they're very, very efficient. And then there's other games when you look, and they are really efficient. They were efficient yesterday. So they've got to become consistent. That's who they've got to be. So that right now there's still too many peaks and valleys in there. There's more peaks than there are valleys now, but the valleys can slip up just every now and then, cost you some games. So that consistency's got to be there.
Yeah, and I think that's actually where there is value there or not. You don't want to lose games. Nobody wants to lose games, but you can learn from losses. You can learn from showing Caleb on film, showing RJ on film. This is what you did wrong. This is how you have to improve, not just for us, but you want to play at the next level. You want to make money. You're not going to make money making some of those decisions. You have to show basketball IQ on a consistent basis to make money. And I know that Caleb wants to play, and they all want to play in the NBA, but Caleb is a guy the NBA is what looking at. I think the program believes he's an NBA player, maybe sooner rather than later, but he's not going to be one if 1 out of 3 or 4 games he has stretches like that, especially at crunch time. And I agree with you 100%, by the way, about them needing close games. And they're the kind of team right now that we've seen so far, they might not take Georgia Tech very seriously on Saturday because they already beat them by 17 in Atlanta. Even though Tech had a 19-2 run, they still beat them by 17, which means that outside of that 4.5-minute stretch, they were 34 points better that afternoon. So I think that's going to be a big challenge for Hubert, is to take that club seriously. And if they don't, they're going to be a situation where they're going to have to win a close game, because I don't think that they're so dynamic yet, that they're so talented that they could overcome not being 100% ready to play. I want to ask you about Brady Manek as well. With Dawson Garcia getting the concussion in minute and 59 seconds into the game at Boston College, Brady has gotten a lot of minutes since then. And I love the cohesion that he plays with Armando. I think they play off each other really well, in part because they're different players. But I think they see each other and they recognize each other well. And the fact that Brady had 5 assists, and I joked after our 3 things video that we did after the UVA game, David, but if you go back and look at his game log at Oklahoma, you're not going to find any 5s in the assist column. You're not going to find 4s either. He did not get a lot of assists at Oklahoma, but he had 5 against Virginia. And he's had a few other games where he's had 3 this year. I like that part of his game. I like when he's not just a catch and shoot guy, even though he could go on tears like that. I like watching him immediately look to the post to see if he can dump down. I like seeing a guy that can swing it, get it back and kick or dump or do all kinds of things. We're seeing parts of his game that maybe folks at Oklahoma didn't see a whole lot of.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I thought this when the play happened, and you mentioned it, and I think it was that obvious. When he gave up the obvious dunk at the open floor and gave the ball up to Bacot, I'm just thinking, could that be a defining moment? A moment where everybody jumps on board and the team kind of changes, and it really becomes all the time an unselfish all for one and one for all type situation where you're loving your neighbors, you love yourself, you're loving your teammate as you love yourself.
Yeah.
Because that stood out. And obviously, like you say, a very unselfish player. And Jay Billis was talking yesterday about the difference of just the type of player that we're seeing at North Carolina compared to what we saw at Oklahoma. And I wonder too, if Dawson Garcia being out as just where he knows it's him and Bacot, they're getting the majority of the minutes. And there's that kind of flow. And I don't mean that bad because everybody knows how much I like Dawson Garcia. But I think one thing that happens now, because obviously all three of those guys are going to get minutes. So when Dawson comes back, Manek's minutes are going to be reduced a little bit. And Bacot minutes are going to be reduced a little bit. But they play differently. So can Brady Manek kind of have a certain flow that he's used to playing with Bacot interrupted? And not only does he sit out a little bit more, but he also has more playing time with Garcia, or Garcia has more playing time with Bacot. Can they get that all together where instead of two playing together, now it's three, and you've got to change how you play and how much you play. So it's appeared to me in the past some games when Garcia's played well, Manek's not played as well. And then when Manek plays well, Garcia doesn't play as well.
Yeah.
So they've got to kind of get off where we're all on the same page as far as the interior players go.
Before we close this out, one other thing I wanted to ask you about as well, which was a big topic Wednesday night. You were tweeting about it. We all were talking about it on Press Where I wrote about it. We asked players, asked Hubert about it, and that was their switching. And it looked a lot like they were switching before the screen even got there. I mean, they were just kind of giving themselves up. There were soft switches. Pardon me?
It was automatic.
Yeah, and they switched against Virginia, but the switches looked tighter, crisper, and other than there was one possession where Manek switched and was on THI Clark, where he stayed. There were two shots in that possession, and he was still on Clark, and they didn't switch back. And I thought, wow, boy, that was early in the game too. I said, what'd they learn from the other night? That was a tough sequence. Ultimately, UVA didn't score on that possession, and so Carolina was able to survive it. But I think they did a better job with that. What is your theory about why a coach? I don't want you to say whether you prefer switching or not switching, but when a coach does switch, what is the best way for the guys to execute it, and how quickly should they switch back generally?
You remember a couple of games ago, North Carolina started switching 1 through 4. They were switching everything but the 5, and they had success with it against some of the teams that they played. And boy, everybody thought it was the greatest thing that ever happened. And then when you get diced by Notre Dame, well, what are they doing? So here's the thing. If switching was the do-all, end-all, Hubert Davis would have put that in the first game. Okay. So obviously he wanted to try to do things the other way. There's good and there's bad with it. I watch LSU, who may be the best defensive team in the country, or one of the best. I wouldn't want to take that away from Baylor or Texas Tech, but probably I'm going to say one of the top 5 defensive teams in the country. I can't tell those guys apart. They can switch a center on a guard, and I can't tell the difference. I mean, they're all rangy and long, and they look like every guy on there looks like they're between 6'6" and 6'8", and you can't so there are never any mismatches. Now, here's the thing. Bacot is being put a lot into switch situations. So when they're playing at Notre Dame, they're really switching a 1 through 5. So they're switching everybody. So teams are going to try to get Bacot in that situation. Oh, they'll get Manek in it too. But here's the thing. Notre Dame has got the perimeter players to exploit it. The problem with Notre Dame is they're just not a physical team. But, man, they have such beautiful offense that they can really make you look bad when they do it because they're shooting threes, they get into the lane. It's a beautiful offense to watch on Mike Bray, and it always has been. So
it's like they screen to set up those pick and pop threes a lot of times.
Yeah. So they can really create some problems. Now you fast forward to the last two ACC teams that they played. When I went to church this morning, my pastor asked me the first thing. He said, "Why in the world can't Tony Bennett recruit any players?" And the first thing he asked me, he watched the game.
The six guys for the 2019 team are in the NBA right now, by the way.
Yeah. But, some of these guys now I obviously spend a lot of time in recruiting, and Virginia's got guys I'd never heard of before.
Yeah.
And they also had some guys I'm sitting there asking myself, how's this guy in the ACC? But having said that, there's still 50 points better in Boston College. So from watching it, there are teams that you can switch and do all that, and you can cause problems because they're not good enough offensively to exploit it. Notre Dame could. Going back to your question, when do you do it? Why do you do it? The drop coverage, the perfect world is this, that we are so good against the ball screen that we can hard hedge and trap and recover. That's what Virginia tried to do, but North Carolina had a great game plan against it. So there's no certain best way, but I think North Carolina in the drop coverage the last 2 or 3 years have had so much trouble with ball screens because they have just played the big off, and the guards have just riddled them off the ball screens at will. And whereas I think Roy the last year or two was more, he just wanted to have patience with it, keep working on it. And I think Hubert Davis is just like, hey, I can't stomach this. We got to do some other things. So he may not look at it and say switching. He may eventually look at it and say switching's not the answer. But I think he's also said, hey, drop coverage is not the answer either. So this is kind of plan B. Does he go into plan C? Does he go into plan D? I think he's just looking for what works. He's going to keep working on what he's doing. And then if he sees his team can't do it, then he goes on to something else.
1-3-1 zone, right? Is that the white flag for Hubert?
I'm telling you what, if he went zone and they play somebody, they hit about 15 threes against that zone, the heads would roll.
Oh, man, we'd all be asking questions. Roy would go zone sometimes, total exasperation. He hated zone, and he'd give up an open three, and that was it. He'd burn that thing to the ground. You wouldn't see it for a month.
Yeah. Of course, now Bobby Knight always said, he said a good man-to-man defense will look like a zone.
Yeah.
Because the help side's so good. Yeah. It all looks like that. But I think one thing in North Carolina, too, here was the thing that I saw. I'm trying – I tell you who said it. Terrence Oglesby that played at Clemson. Yeah. I saw his tweet during that game, and he said, where is the pressure that North Carolina played when we played them? Because they were always extending out on the floor and really upping guys. So their cover, they were switching, but they were really kind of packed in and so far playing off so much that they were letting Notre Dame just move the ball side to side to side. Yeah. They were never in passing lanes. They never put North Carolina under any kind of pressure or any kind of adversity offensively. They never got them out of their comfort zone. Notre Dame did what they wanted to do, and then North Carolina tried to counter.
Yeah, it looked like they were running dummy offense at times there. All right, David, we're going to go ahead and shut this one off. We'll probably do another one. They got Georgia Tech, then they go to Miami and go to Wake. So we'll do one after that. I'm looking forward to the Miami trip. Taking my wife with me. She's never been down there. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Are you going to get the same hotel with no sports television?
No. That's the Stadium Hotel, which is like almost in the parking lot of Hard Rock Stadium. I've stayed there twice before. And the last time I said, no, I'm not doing that because I couldn't watch it. What game was it? I wonder. What was Iowa and somebody that night? I couldn't see it because they didn't have any TV in there.
I think they'll get Georgia Tech pretty good. They should. I hope the Miami game down there is a war.
I think it's going to be. Miami's got some of what Notre Dame has, but a little bit more dribble drive in what they do too.
Steve Forbes is a winner, and I've known him for a long time, and I knew he would do a great job there. I couldn't believe somebody didn't gobble him up years before Wake Forest finally, they wised up and saw a good thing. He's going to win at Wake Forest. I think they could really give North Carolina a battle. They need this. They need some tight games, and they need to win those tight. And I really feel like they win a couple of close games, especially on the road, then you can see this team take a major step.
A good buddy of mine in the business, Brett Friedlander, shout out to B. Fried here. He's been doing this for 40 years. I respect his opinion as much as anybody's. And he says Wake Forest, he's seen them 5 times in person now. So they're 100% for real. It's the best team they've had since Dino Gaudio was there when they had all that NBA talent. So I agree with you. I think, Georgia Tech, Carolina should win, but then the next two before we talk again, at Miami and at Wake Forest, Carolina fans need to start looking at these games as opportunities to enhance the NCAA resume. There aren't a lot of Q1 and Q2 games, but at Miami and at Wake Forest could end up as Q1 games or certainly Q2 games, but definitely Q1 opportunities for Carolina. So they need to get some of those things on the resume. So this is a big stretch coming up for the Tar Heels, also just to play better and show that they are improving. And as you said, David, one of those games is going to be very, very close. They're going to have to show they can win a close game, especially on the road.
And if I'm North Carolina fan, I would start becoming fans of Miami and Florida State and Wake Forest and Virginia Tech, because some of these teams are going to be really bad in the ACC.
Yeah.
You really need 4, 5, 6 teams in the ACC to become strong, because it is going to be hard to jump up net rankings and all that. I'm telling you what, when you're in what is considered not one of the strongest couple of conferences, it is hard to make ground up when it comes to seedings. Michigan
had tough loss with Rutgers, and the postgame was pretty ugly there too. They need Michigan to figure things out and start winning games. I don't think they will either. They need Furman to roll in the SoCon. They need Charleston to win a lot of games in the CAA. I think those two things can happen. Furman, I have a little bit more faith in. They need those teams to just pile up wins and get up there into at least be Q2 games for them.
When I saw Virginia yesterday, I was thought about Michigan. I said, I've already seen this song and dance once. Unskilled, unathletic. I mean, they look like Michigan did.
Yeah, I think Michigan's an NIT team.
Yeah.
So that's right now. That's probably their best win still. So
I don't know, getting through the Big Ten, man, that's tough. You can look up in a hurry, man, have a losing record.
Yeah, no doubt. So that's why Carolina need that. Miami winning at Duke was huge. Miami's been winning some games, very quietly been winning some games. Larinaga actually got a depth.
The last year, kind of tell you how it works. The last year I worked with the Minnesota side, they had a losing record. They were like 15-16. And Ken Palmer in the top 30.
Yeah.
In the nation with a 15-16 record. They were in the top 30. So that tells you that they will look at net rankings. If you lose to a top 10 team, that's better than beating a team that's ranked number 95.
Yeah.
So like I said, it's just hard to make. You say, well, you look up, you say, well, we've won 8 or 10 in a row. If you've not beaten good, sound teams, they're not going to get credit for it.
But if you win road games, that'll help. And that's why that loss to Notre Dame was big. They could have had 3 ACC road wins right out of the gate, which would have been pretty big. So if you can win on the road, that'll help. Those games are always skewed a little bit differently for the NET, and that can help your NET rating. And also just the committee will see, okay, you didn't have it's not your fault the league wasn't great. You won the games in front of you, and if they win 7 league games on the road, that's going to help them a lot as well. But more than all that, and I'm a big proponent of looking at resume stuff in January, but more than that, there's a lot this club has to do better, and then they have to do it consistently better. Consistency, I think, is the key right now. And if they are consistent and more like they were against UVA and more like they were in Chestnut Hill, that club's going to win a ton of games in this league because there just aren't that many good teams in the league.
Yeah, I agree. And they just you definitely don't need bad losses. So they like we said, we're hoping what has happened here. In the last started happening yesterday, starting to see some signs that could really be they really flipped the switch and become what people think they can be.
And it may turn out that Notre Dame was in a bad loss because they got that win over Kentucky, which is big. They need Kentucky to do well in the league, but that could end up being not a terrible loss and won't really hurt Carolina. We'll revisit this again after, I guess, in about a week and a half after they play 2 more games, and we'll kind of see what the Tar Heels are. David and I will grind it out as we do every couple of weeks. We'd like to do it once a week during the season, but the schedule's been so quirky since before Christmas. We'll be back doing this after Wake Forest. That's 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks from now. Anyway, he's David. I'm AJ. We very much appreciate you stopping by.